Back when we covered the Yu-Gi-Oh anime archetypes that have yet to be printed, not only did we realize at the time that there was enough for another list, but there's enough for like another 5 lists. So we again decided to dip into the pool of archetypes that showed up in the anime but never in the real life card game. Same rules as the last video on this topic. These archetypes have to have been showcased in some manner in the anime, but never fully got printed into the physical game. We'll be going over how they played in the source material, along with how they might be revamped for the modern game. Also, if they were featured in video games like Duel Links, they're still eligible for this list if they aren't in real life yet. And once again, joining me is my co-host Sam from Dungeon Dive Bar.
I went into the VRAINS and I did not like what I saw. There was way too much cheese there.
Now, let's sort through the top 10 Yu-Gi-Oh anime archetypes that don't exist yet. Volume 2. Number 10, Spice. We're starting the list with another food-based archetype. This archetype is centered around summoning Curry Fiend Rue, who's a giant chef demon. This duel always stood out to me in GX, both because it was a silly food duel, which are always fun, and it was used by the leader of the Raw Yellow Dorm, who, despite being the headmaster of one of the major dorms, was only a background character, and got this duel as a meta joke about how no one tends to care about the Raw Yellow Dorm, since all the plot-important dorm locations are in the red and blue or white dorms. Also, he's a discount common rider named Curry Mask, and it adds to the low-stakes vibe of the duel. His playstyle revolves around using spice spell cards for damage or battle phase related effects, combined with his weak normal monsters, which were vegetables with arms and legs. Also, shoutouts to Mixed Spice Garam Masala, which adds 3 spice cards to your hand. That's better advantage than most search cards in the game, but the archetype is bad, so they need it. Then you have his Curry Pot Continuous spell, which is a dimensional fissure for the user, or just Chaos Distill again, where it banishes your monsters when they would go to the graveyard, but it has an extra effect. When you have one of each vegetable guy banished, it lets you summon the boss, Curry Fiend Rue, from the deck, and it gains attack per banished monster and spice in your graveyard. So essentially, he's Grenmod you with extra ways to get attack points. To improve the archetype, give the vegetable monsters effects that expedite them getting banished and add more vegetables for your curry. Something like how the Memento archetype activates their effects by destroying themselves and sending other mementos to the graveyard, so your boss dragon that needs 5 in the grave can summon itself. Maybe broaden the summoning conditions for Curry Fiend Rue, and let the Curry Fiend get summoned when a certain amount of plant monsters are banished instead, since most of the vegetable-based plant monsters that are unrelated to the archetype, like Carrot Wade Champ, are plants as well.
I think the idea of making it a bunch of plants that focus on self-banishing, or banishing your opponent's cards as well, would be really cool. And also, somehow related to Mystic Tomato, Mystic Potato, or even worse, make it related to the In-Mato archetype. Granted, there's no tomatoes in his curry, it's just carrots, onions, and potatoes, but you could have a beef item in there. And I also like the fact that his spell cards are spices. It could be a really fun cooking-themed deck, and it would also be really fun to have it play nothing like the current cooking-themed deck of Nouvelle.
It's also probably a good idea to give him more protection, like making him indestructible or untargetable, or maybe even let him revive himself or the other vegetable men if he's destroyed or banished, like the Snake Eyes boss when it goes to the grave and revives the mini Snake Eyes monsters. Either way, I like the idea of keeping his attack impossibly high when everything's banished. Really though, I mainly want him for that design. He's got a giant spoon weapon, the pouring thing on his head, and an electric rice cooker like he's ready to seal away Demon King Piccolo. Number 9, White Warrior. White Warrior isn't the flashiest archetype, but something about it always stood out to me. Maybe it's that every major 5D's character has their deck printed, and this was the most developed of the one-off characters with decks that don't exist. It was used by Bolton, who is a one-duel rival of Crow, since Bolton led to the death of one of Crow's friends, Pearson, who helped him protect orphan children, and Pearson was also Bolton's business partner, who was much less corrupt, and Bolton didn't like that. And now Crow wants to duel Bolton to win back Pearson's prized card, the Black-Winged Dragon. Bolton's White Warriors are thematically parallel to Crow and Pearson's main archetype, Black Wings. It has the black versus white motif. They're both creatures with wings, Black Wings being birds and White Warriors being fairies, and their names both have the same format of archetype name hyphen a verbose name with the in the middle, being focused on weather conditions for the White Warriors. warriors, like Hail the Iron Hammer or Snow the Rope Dart. Most of the effects are generic, like when one of the white warriors destroys a monster or inflicts damage, you can destroy one card on the field, but their main goal is to summon out their synchro monster that's actually been printed and not within their archetype, Blood Mephist, who inflicts 300 points of damage for each card your opponent controls, and inflicts 300 damage each time your opponent sets a back row. So basically, this archetype is designed to work with burn damage.
Yeah, I think Bolton's White Warriors have a lot of functionality in terms of what they could be. He refers to it as an anti-Blackwings deck because he specifically built that to defeat the user of the Blackwings to get Blackwinged Dragon, because that's a card that's worth getting. At least it is now because of the severe amount of retrains.
First off, retrain Blood Mephist to be a part of the archetype and enhance the effect where it picks off more damage. Maybe just have it burn your opponent on every card they play, similar to Chain Energy or Masquerade Dragon. Since this was the card that essentially killed Pearson in the anime, you could also have a board wipe effect after it racks up a certain amount of damage, giving it another parallel to Blackwings, since that's what the newer Dark Rage Dragon can do after getting enough counters on it that also burn your opponent. For the main deck monsters, their effects should be similar to Battle Wasps or Trick Stars, where they have smaller burn damage effects when there are more of them on the field or when your opponent does something, helping build up for the bigger burn damage effects with Mephist. Since there are only 4 main deck monsters in the anime, there's a lot of room you could do with creating new ones. Maybe even give one of them a Terror of the Overroot effect that forces your opponent to set a card, forcing more burn damage to be taken. And since they were meant to be anti-Blackwing, maybe give them something that goes against the Blackwing strategy that also affects other archetypes, like not being able to add cards to your opponent's hand. Or something less ban-worthy, your opponent can't target their own monsters since Blackwings do a good amount of self-targeting.
That's a really powerful thing that no one ever thinks about. But imagine not being able to use SP Little Knight to bounce your own cards, or even Bestials you can't banish from your own graveyard. There's a lot of disruption that not being able to target your own cards could afford that we really don't see in the modern era, or ever.
Overall, this archetype may not have the most unique gimmick on its own, but burn damage decks sure can be fun, or frustrating, depends who you are. Number 8. Deckmasters. This one probably sounds weird since Deckmasters were basically just an alternate format of the game in the anime, but when you think about it, there's an argument you could make for them to be an archetype on their own. In the virtual world, you would pick a monster from your deck to be your Deckmaster before each duel, and it gives you a special effect that you could use during the duel, sort of like a skill in Duel Links, or a continuous effect for you or your opponent. This monster was off to the side of the duel, but you could choose to send them onto the field if you need an extra body. However, if they're destroyed, you instantly lose the duel.
I love the Deckmaster concept. That was the best thing of any filler arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think they could work if you did them as maybe extra deck retrains, when they have to go in the extra monster zone and they can't be selected by an attack target, they're unaffected by card effects or something.
And we thought of that before the Robotic Knight retrain.
Or go the full extra mile and make it an alternate rule set, like how Edison's been formally recognized.
While it seems redundant since all the base cards that became Deckmasters already exist, we haven't seen most of these monsters with their Deckmaster effects, with the exception of some that had their exact effect as a Deckmaster, or retrains like the Blue Flame Swordsman who directly referenced the Deckmaster effect. Some of the Deckmaster effects were kinda lame, like Deep Sea Warrior negating an attack if you tribute 2 monsters, but other ones have some good potential if you beef up the effects, like Lord of D giving you an extra dragon normal summon, or Goddess with the Third Eye essentially being a fusion gate and letting you fuse by discarding 1 card. Maybe make these effects quick effects or take away the cost and they'd have some niche uses.
Just imagine a retrain of Judgeman. It's Judgeman Clear the Courtroom. It's their Deckmaster abilities were the attack names. Like how we have Kaiser Glider Golden Burst. It's their signature move card on retrain. Just imagine summoning Judgeman and having a quick play Raigeki that does burn damage for 1,000 life points every turn. It's Judgeman, and he has use. I'm picking up on Judgeman specifically because his effect was the most powerful of all of them. Just clear the courtroom, Raigeki. He had a really weird deck. We could talk about him on maybe a top 10 filler villain list.
Not sure if they would work as a cohesive archetype, or just something like the Archfiend archetype, where there are random Archfiends and other archetypes that would not work well in an Archfiend-focused deck, but you can still use the Archfiend-specific support support cards for the lone Archfiends and other archetypes, like the field spell Archfiend Palabyrinth working with Infernities to get out their main Searcher monster, which just so happens to also be an Archfiend. Either way, I like the idea of Deckmasters being an archetype with splashable card effects. And perhaps to reference how you lost if they were destroyed on the field, they could have some negative effect with a secret bonus if they're destroyed, like they wipe your field similar to Fire King Island destroying your monsters when it leaves the field, but maybe their support has some good effects on destruction, so it's a hidden upside. For naming each monster, it would probably be something like the Zephyra archetype, where they all have Zephyra and another archetype in their name, so they work with their own deck and the additional archetype. For example, something like Deckmaster Nightmare Penguin would also work with all the penguin support. And how about for the Deckmaster boss monster, it's another retrain of Five-Headed Dragon, or it's all the Big Fives Deckmasters as a group. Also, a Shinato retrain is definitely incoming if this ever becomes an archetype. Even though there are more missing anime archetypes that were established as archetypes from the beginning, we always thought the Deckmasters could be a great nostalgia grab with their forgotten effects. Number 7, Tomato. Zexal has a pretty good track record of making sure all the main heroes, villains, and side characters get all their cards in the game, leaving us with a bunch of one-off characters. While there are a few serious ones with their cards missing, I gotta pick one of the goofier duels from the Heartland tournament against the Farmer. He had a tomato-themed deck, and as a special rule for the duel, both players could not declare an attack unless they pulled and ate a random vegetable from one of his sacks, with the major conflict being Yuma kept pulling tomatoes and he hates tomatoes, so he couldn't attack and almost lost because of it. As mentioned, it was silly and I love the premise. Who doesn't love the occasional Yu-Gi-Oh farmer?
Hi guys, it's me, the farmer from Heavy Storm. Now, I don't know if you heard about this feller selling tomatoes, but he's a stand-up guy, and he also might do well to work with that Captain Corn feller and have a nice garden-themed deck.
He has two main deck monsters, being Tomato Knight, who has the giant germ effect of summoning another copy of itself from the deck when it's destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, and Tomato in Tomato, which has a Nimble Beaver or Tour Guide style effect of summoning another copy of itself from the deck. Both these monsters are level 3, supporting his boss monster, the rank 3 Xyz monster, Tomato King, which is just a big guy. Detach a material and he doubles his attack, so he goes from 1600 to 3200, and beyond that, his attack gets insurmountable, so it's a cool gimmick but no protection. He also has a few spells, like the field spell Tomato Paradise, which summons a tomato token every time a plant monster is summoned except by an effect, and Tomato Pult, which tributes a tomato monster like the tokens you're summoning to deal a bit of burn damage. A bit of this archetype was tested out in Duel Links, where we got Tomato in Tomato and King, and there we learned they're actually pretty good, especially Tomato in Tomato. A monster that summons another copy of itself from the deck with ease is always useful. Its only restriction is for Xyz summoning. It can only be used to summon plant Xyz monsters, which there are 3 of in the game that are rank 3, but it doesn't restrict any other type of summoning methods, so Link, Synchro, etc. all fair game. This alone could make a solid engine for a plant pile deck. The rest of the cards in the archetype range from okay to pretty good, but Tomato in Tomato would be the star. The main effect they should add to this archetype, whether it's on a continuous card or part of the field spell, is an effect that mimics that you could not attack unless you ate a vegetable. Maybe have it where you can't attack or activate an effect unless you tribute a monster, basically turning every monster into Panther Warrior, which goes with how the field spell generates tomato tokens, so it's easy for you to tribute a monster and you're basically eating a tomato when you attack, but it's a mild floodgate for the opponent, adding a bit of salt to your tomato stew.
Because as we've seen with cards like Masquerade Dragon and Red Ice Darkness Flare Metal Dragon, if you can't pay the life points, you just can't activate the card in the first place. I think that's pretty neat. And then you maybe do it with some corn, and you throw yourself together a nice garden salad, what with that curry fella, you have yourself a grand old potluck. I had to do a farmer from Heavy Storm bit with the tomato guy.
Number 6, Topologina. The topologic monsters are pretty well known in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! They're all Link monsters that can act as bosses. Bomber Dragon was a board wipe for the main monster zone, Zeroboros banishes the field, and Gumblar Dragon even got banned for being too gumbly. However, a lot of people forget that they had a support archetype with a similar name in the anime called Topologina. This was used by Kandor, the AI assistant with free will created by Revolver known as VRAINS in the dub. He was the antagonist of Season 1 and then joined the protagonists when the AI characters were the antagonists in the later seasons. VRAINS had the assorted topologic links in his extra deck, but Kandor used the Topologinas, which were Cyburst monsters with B puns for their names. Just anything that could be a B pun with no consistency. Baby, Bambi, Gatsby, Sassabee, the Vehicle. Okay, that's the best one. I want them for their names alone.
I love bees, and I love sci-fi, and I love big explosive dragons. I would love to play this archetype.
Their effects are pretty basic swarming for link summoning, like banishing monsters for a special summon, or special summoning to a monster zone that a link arrow points to. But I like that Baby can special summon itself if the life points of both players are equal. Clever idea, but completely useless after turn 2, or even after turn 1 if your opponent plays an archetype that pays life points from the start. Then you can use your Topologina monsters to summon your Topologic Link monsters, which Kandor had a few of, but she did have one Topologina Link monster, being Sassabee, which lets you add your Topologina monsters back to your hand that were used in its Link summon, which is a cool way to recycle cards. Then you can keep on summoning them if you have the resources.
And their effects are focused around supporting the topologics, swarming in order to trigger their special summon effects for Trisbana, Bomber Dragon. She did not use Gumbler because, again, I got banned for being too gumbly, and Zerovoros hadn't been printed yet and was reserved for Revolver having his last big boss monster that wasn't a Boral.
Yeah, basically, if a monster is special summoned to a zone where a Topologic points to, it auto-triggers their effect, so Topologina is very good at that. But when printing this archetype, I think they should give Topologina its own boss monster. Maybe their boss could do something that lets them tag into the Topologic monsters to show how they're connected and get a quick board disruption. Overall, when it comes to the Topologina monsters, I'm here for the puns, but I stay for the link climbing. Number 5, Orichalcos. I kinda forget Darts, the main villain of the Waking the Dragon season of the original anime, never had his archetype printed. They printed both of his boss monsters with weaker effects, being Divine Serpent Ge and Orichalcos Shuneros, and his main field spell, the Seal of Orichalcos, so it always felt like we had what we needed from him. But all of his smaller main deck monsters, spells, and the rituals never got any love, though I understand why. The Darts duel in the anime felt like a mishmash of boss stuff happening without any explanation. Darts just kept pulling out monsters that have attack points that eventually reach infinity, and he was able to beyond double his life points with a single card. Because of that, the archetype seems difficult to make for the real-life card game without rewriting effects entirely. In fact, we saw that with the few cards he had printed. In real life, Shuneros only gets 1,000 attack points per monster your opponent controls, and Ge can make his attack equal to the highest attack monster on the field per battle. Still good effects, but nowhere like they were in the anime.
I want to share a very funny fact about Darts. So I guess his only real video game appearance was the Legacy of the Duelist game. They have to give him a completely different deck because he's such an inconsistent character that there is no like general theme for his deck other than boss vibes, where they gave him arrow mages and the other was generic random normal monsters because for some reason they made his boss monster Orichalcos Shuneros normal monster support. This is his boss monster in the anime's real world equivalent. It's a level 10 machine with question mark attack. Cannot be normal summoned or set. Must first be special summoned by its own effect. At the end of the damage step, if your normal monster is destroyed by battle, you can special summon this card from your hand. Gains 1,000 attack for each monster your opponent controls. Face up level 4 normal monsters on the field cannot be destroyed by card effects. Darts played 0 normal monsters and nothing about his deck had any relation to them. They just slapped a random effect on this card.
The smaller Orichalcos monsters revolved around reducing battle damage to 0, and then the boss monsters gained that attack, so they could reach 5-digit attack values with this, along with a ritual monster that summons tokens to block attacks to stall.
This ritual monster is such a cluster of mechanics that can be so powerful and so bad at the same time. It summons tokens and then uses counters on them.
Anime Shuneros would summon 2 other monsters, Dexia and Aristeros, which make his attack equal to the attack or defense of the monster he's battling plus 300, so it's always bigger. I could see a retrained Shuneros and the other cards in the real life deck working somewhat like Vylon, where they equip to the boss monster for for these effects, and then they essentially turn into Moon Mirror Shield, which makes a monster's attack points always 100 higher than the better stat value of the monster it's battling. And that's where I see this archetype going. Make them gain effects with the smaller monsters in the deck that always raise the boss's attack to be just bigger than the opponent to make it feel like they're infinitely stronger like in the anime. Also retrain Gad to have Orichalcos in his name.
This is one of my favorite. Orichalcos Gigas. When this card is destroyed, you can special summon it, but it cannot attack for the rest of the turn, and when special summon it, skip your next draw phase. This card gains 500 attack times the number of times it was special summoned during the duel. It's an infinite wall, called by the grave, banishing, anything, bouncing it. There's so much stuff that's just way too powerful. The only reason he had any success is because effect destruction, like Raigeki and stuff, was basically banned in the anime because it reduced the drama. I attack! Oh, that's Mirror Force. Okay. I have no monsters now. You attack directly? Cool.
Also, if they ever print those extra Orichalcos field spell rings, they ultimately were just life point gain effects since he had to pay 10,000 life points for his bosses, so if you want to insert life point recovery into his game plan, go ahead. In the end, Orichalcos might just end up being a stun stall deck, but Darts was a final boss, so he should have his cards in the game on principle. Number 4, Drones. One of my favorite characters from VRAINS was Blood Shepherd. He was edgy, but he loved his mom, and eventually he was on the right side of the conflict. Even when he was on the wrong side, it was really just from blind rage against the wrong characters in revenge for his mom. Though it was kinda silly out of context, hearing him say with his edgy voice, "Whoever loses this duel loses their account and can't log in again. Mwahahaha." It makes sense knowing the world, but it's kinda funny that his master plan is to just ban your account.
Not so much about the drone cards real fast, but I just want to talk about one of the things he did in the anime was retool his deck specifically to give his opponent PTSD so he'd win easier. This guy doesn't play around.
Because I like him so much, I'd play his archetype if it existed. He uses drones, which were machine monsters with a pretty standard swarming strategy. You can summon one, then summon more from the hand deck or graveyard, or summon drone tokens. Then you can use those drones to link summon into your battle drones with damage or battle-related effects, and there's also a tuner and fusion spell mixed in, so he had a synchro and fusion drone for his bigger monsters as well. The big link monster, Battle Drone General, lets you pick a drone to attack directly once per turn, which usually have 1,000 or less attack points, and then anytime a drone monster makes a direct attack, the General lets you tribute that monster to deal burn damage equal to that drone's attack points. Then other drones like Battle Drone Sergeant gets the ability to attack directly if a different drone attacks directly that turn, allowing you to later use the General's burn damage effect again, so you can see where this is going. There's a domino effect where they keep on attacking directly and then burn for the same amount. It's a fun strategy of chip damage.
The drones were kind of like Transformers Energon vibes, which is let's power link to form higher tier drones, and then also a synchro, but it's a machine archetype focused around summoning rapidly and being military themed. I think that's cool. I think he had a lot of really good support cards and a really strong gameplay loop that would have given him a good win if he didn't choose to duel main characters and main villains only. He had 6 duels.
As for protection, it's sufficient. They have cards like their Camouflage Drone Trap protecting them against destruction, and their Synchro monster has a counter mechanic where it can remove counters to negate a monster effect and then deal damage. The deck seems competent based on everything we saw. It might need a bit of help if it wants to be anything better than Rogue, but as with a lot of VRAINS archetypes, it comes out of the package usable without any changes. Number 3, Spirit. This is not the specific type of effect monster that goes back to the hand, but rather a pendulum archetype used by the Arc 5 villain, Leo Akaba. He's the father of the main rival of the series, Reiji, or Declan in the dub, and acts as the main villain for part of the series until the real final boss, Zark, pushes him aside.
I think the thing that pissed me off the most about that duel is, one, Leo did not even finish that duel. It got interrupted because he just abandoned the duel halfway to complete his plan anyway, and then he didn't do anything.
He's got your standard villainous persona, but only has one real duel, and later jumps into the middle of another duel, only to get obliterated almost immediately as a plot point to show the power of the actual main villain. His spirit archetype and its sub-archetype spirit gem revolve around using their main deck pendulum boss, Spirit Tech Force Pendulum Governor, and its fusion monster, Master Spirit Tech Force Pendulum Ruler.
I will say their boss monsters had two of the best sounding names of any Japanese card or English card. Those sound like good cards. And let's see what they do. They don't do anything, really.
Both of them have an effect where they contribute a spirit gem that hasn't activated their effects that turn, allowing the boss monsters to copy that effect and use it twice that turn. The two main spirit gem monsters are Sylphid Core, which destroys a spell or trap, and Salamander Core, which destroys a monster, and both inflict 800 damage when they destroy a card. So essentially, the bosses get to destroy two monsters or two back row and deal 1600 damage. Not the biggest boss effects, but if you get both the Governor and the Ruler on the field at the same time, that's potentially 4 cards destroyed, which is pretty nice. Plus, the Ruler doubles any damage dealt from these effects, so it's really doing 3200 damage when it activates its effect, and that's a pretty good chunk of damage.
Yeah, and Pendulum Ruler has a 3500 stat line, and does have a really cool, very much anime boss monster floodgate lockdown part that is also very in line with modern decks. Cannot be destroyed by card effects. Monsters your opponent control with a level lower than or equal to this card, it's 12, so every monster with a level. And monsters your opponent controls other than pendulum monsters cannot attack, also their effects are negated. That is a skill drain on legs if you're playing against not a pendulum deck. A skill drain that can't be destroyed by card effects and requires you to use pendulum monsters to fight it.
Of everything, the doubling effect on this archetype always felt neat, even if it required a bunch of summoning and effect activations to ultimately just destroy 2 cards. Number 2, Kabuki Stage. As I mentioned in the first anime archetype video, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX just created new archetypes on rainy days. Half the time, if there was a one-off character to duel against, which happened a lot, they just got a full new archetype that mainly worked because it was a scripted anime duel, but since the characters were so insignificant, their archetypes never saw the light of day in real life. During the impromptu GX tournament of Season 2, we met the one-and-done opponent Orlando, the Kabuki dancer. In Japanese, he was just a cosplayer, but the dub made him a Broadway performer, which honestly, not the worst localization. They're both types of theater, and Kabuki has been performed on international stages, though I'm not sure about Broadway. Obviously, I would have preferred no change, but it was mid-2000s for kids, so nothing to be concerned over. Orlando was a quirky character who seemed like a nice guy and was just here for the medals, so it was a calm break between all the mass mind control in Season 2. His deck was Kabuki themed, involving different set pieces and monsters from Japanese folklore with a stage play aesthetic. I don't know why, but this archetype always stood out to me. I think it's the swapping field spell mechanic. I've always liked how Dream Mirror can quick effect swap into its light and dark fields, which is sort of like how this archetype worked. Each field spell was based on a Kabuki set and had an effect where it could swap into another Kabuki field from the deck. The unique effects were pretty generic, with the Bridge special summoning a level 4 monster from the hand if a monster was attacked, the Sea searches a level 5 monster, and the Cherry Blossoms randomize the attack target. Yeah, you probably need to revise these effects if you print them now. Just give them stronger special summoning and searching mechanics and maybe some destruction prevention. Maybe even make the field swapping a quick effect so you can pull a fast one over on your opponent. For the monsters, they all have basic battle phase effects in the anime, like gaining attack during the damage step or switching to defense when attacked, and his big dragon boss has an effect but he never uses it. Just give them better effects that help them special summon themselves faster, and give them a fusion monster boss that's the whole cast on stage, maybe even extra negates or effects depending on the field that's up.
I think that making it, like you said, like a 3-act sequence of the Kabuki stage thing could be really cool. Definitely one of those things that makes sense more as an anime archetype rather than a real archetype. I do want to shout out some of the names of his cards, especially because the Japanese names versus the English names are definitely a lost in translation thing. One of his cards is supposed to be a Tengu, but because the concept of the Tengu wasn't really well known in America yet, she was made into a goblin. So there's this beautiful woman, and she says, "This is a goblin." And everyone just rolls with it. And then his boss monster was a dragon. He was beating the 5D's curve there by just having a random dragon. He even beat out Jesse as, "I have an arbitrary dragon boss unrelated to the rest of my archetype. It's Genghis Khan, the Emperor Dragon." It also has a gun in its mouth, and I think that's hilarious.
Also, none of their names have a word in common, so they would need to update their names to have Kabuki in them so they could work as an archetype beyond just being Kabuki themed. Finally, can we give them an effect like Valence or Dream Mirror where they can put a field spell in both your and your opponent's field zones to give your own monsters extra field bonuses? I always thought that was a cool interaction. Another reason I unfortunately tried playing Dream Mirror. Just like the last video on this topic, we would normally put the honorable mentions here, but as mentioned in the intro, there's like over 40 good anime-only archetypes, so we'll just make this a reoccurring list topic at this point. Whether you want to see more of the VRAINS, Kaiba Corp Grand Prix, or GX one-off archetypes that haven't hit the real-life game yet, we'll probably cover them in the future. So in the meantime, just like, comment, subscribe, other things, and let's see what the final entry has in store. For number 1, we chose an archetype that we love, was the final boss of a season, and seems to be the most requested archetype missing on the previous anime list. Number 1, Armatos Legio. The second season of Yu-Gi-Oh! VRAINS was about stopping the AI that went rogue and viewed humans as a threat to their world. They were led by the Light Ignis, nicknamed Lightning. He was not willing to concede an inch, had a really good angry face, and being the main villain of Season 2, we saw him duel a lot against allies and enemies alike. Anyone who tried to defect felt the sting of his archetype, Armatos Legio. Aesthetically, they were ancient gladiator-styled monsters with a cybernetic twist.
I like this because it's almost like a combination of gladiator beasts and Crusadia, because they're all named after Latin and weaponry and military formations, but they're also all focused on, if this gets pointed to by a link arrow, it gains bonus effect. But also, they have very silly names to pronounce. And this is kind of me making a little bit of fun of Latin, but Armatos Legium Segmentata. Armatos Legia Magica Alcum. Like, there's a lot of ridiculous names, and I'm also mad about it because they are very similar to an OC archetype I designed back in my youth that was Greek military themed, named after weaponry and military formations. And I saw this and went, well, never letting this see the light of day.
Since they were based on armies of ancient times, they were all about battle formations, with the smaller monsters following the bigger Link monsters on the field. It was a Link climbing deck where the Link monsters get bonuses when they point to other Armatos Legio monsters, and the main deck monsters are statues of warriors with 0 attack that can provide certain protections or get special bonuses when they're summoned to a zone where an Armatos Link monster points to, since they can't do anything offensively on their own. Seeing that the Link monsters are more battle phase oriented, a few of the main deck monsters like Scudam make it where other monsters can't be attacked except the Link monster that points to it, and it provides destruction protection to boot. Some of the lower Link rating monsters also provide protection, like Centurion negating attacks. Then you have its mini-boss Legionis reviving monsters from the graveyard to re-trigger searching effects or get protection again, and the boss monster Magnus Dux, which can bounce cards based on how many cards it's co-linked with, and it's also an Omni-negate. Finally, the real MVP of the deck is Judgment Arrows, the spell that provides Link arrows from the back row and doubles Link monsters' attack points. If Judgment Arrows is removed, you destroy the monsters that it points to, but with the various protection effects within the archetype, the downside might be moot. While Judgment Arrows can work with any Link deck, Armatos Legio has specific effects that search it or recover it from the graveyard, so it's primary to the deck's game plan. It's probably why Konami has taken its its time with this boss archetype since they would need to figure out what to do with this potentially broken spell, but maybe it would just be nerfed if it ever gets printed. Regardless, these guys look cool, these guys act cool, and Armatos Legio is well designed enough to get number 1 on this list. Now, what did you think? Are all these archetypes worthy of being printed, or should some of them have remained lost in the anime forever? And once again, what are some of your favorite anime archetypes that haven't been printed yet? Whether we discussed them or not, let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next video.